Korea is exploring its options of better addressing universal tariffs that the new Trump administration earlier pledged on all U.S. imports. On Press Perspective today, we touch upon trade amid Trump tariffs. Hello and welcome to yet another edition of Press Perspective. It's Wednesday, January 22nd here in Seoul, and I'm Min Sunhee. Speaking to members of the media gathered at the Oval Office Monday night as he signed a series of executive initiatives, U.S. President Donald Trump claimed a 25% tariff will go into effect on all Canadian and Mexican imports into the U.S. starting February 1st. So what does this mean for the rest of his trade partners, including South Korea? To answer that question, I have Andres Sanchez Braun with Spanish news agency EFE Spain here in the studio. Andres, welcome back.
Hello, Sonia. Thank you so much for having us here, as always.
I also have Professor Soo-young of Business at Chung-Ang University. Joining this talk virtually, Professor Song, as always, it's a pleasure.
Okay, thank you for inviting me, and good afternoon to both of you.
Yeah. Right, Professor Song. Andres, we'll start here in the studio. Let's begin with the Finance Ministry's biggest ever export finance support.
Yes, the Korean Finance Ministry actually approved of a record financial support for the export sector of around 360 trillion won, which would be around 250 billion USD, I believe. This is all to try to alleviate, to mitigate the impact of whatever decisions U.S. President Donald Trump comes up with in terms of trade policy. And it includes, for example, more insurance support, for example, in cases of extreme volatility in the foreign exchange markets. And we know that, of course, there will be such volatility happening probably because it does every time that President Trump says it's something unexpected. There's also going to be, for example, more government spending in terms of organizing trade fairs or sending foreign trade delegations overseas. But of course, it's natural to think that the government would put up a record budget for this if we think that what you just mentioned on Inauguration Day, President Trump already threatened to levy a 25% tax on its trading partners, big trading partners, Canada and Mexico, starting February 1st, if both countries do not cut the flow of illegal immigrants and drugs into the U.S. He's also talked about a possible tariff of up to 60% on China. And of course, already this scenario poses a great problem for Korean companies because many big Korean companies have manufacturing facilities in countries like China and Mexico. We're talking automotive companies, we're talking semiconductor, battery manufacturers, those companies that are already facing uncertainty in the U.S. because they invested heavily, and now President Trump is talking of reviewing what he calls unfair subsidy policies from his government. On top of that, of course, there's the possibility that President Trump decides to go on an all-open trade war with China, which would hurt the Korean economy enormously because these countries are basically its two largest trading partners. And there's always a possibility of President Trump coming up with an exclusive tariff to be applied only on Korean goods and services, because we know that he's said it every now and then that he considers Korea to be one of those countries that take advantage of the U.S. So looking at all this all these possible scenarios, it's only natural to think that the government would rally as much support as it can for the exports industry, which accounts for around 40% of Korean GDP.
Right. Keeping in mind what Andres has just said, Professor Song, then what Korean sectors do you believe will be negatively affected by new U.S. trade policies, and which ones are likely to perhaps be positively affected by Trump's new trade policies?
At least there is no positive effect because of the tariff. It always causes the price of the export is increased. But because of the depreciation of Korean won against the US dollar, actually that effect, the tariff effect, 25%, for example, effect will be reduced by as much as 15% because 10% depreciation already occurred in the last year. So clearly the Korean economy has been dependent upon the international trade and export to the United States. So in the United States, it has been the trade surplus has been $55.7 billion in trade in terms of the US dollars, and it is up in 25.4% from 2023 and 2024. But the reason is because the U.S. economy is very strong and robust, therefore their power, and they would like to import more goods from all abroad. Actually, that is very greatly helpful for the U.S. economy to experience the declining inflation. But however, at least Andres has already pointed out that the diverse negative impact on the semiconductor and the rechargeable battery is really serious, is because the already several our multinational enterprise has promised to build a factory in the United States to avoid the tariff. But as long as they make use of some parts produced in China and other countries, they are still subject to the tariff, and also they could be, the direct threat is the removal of the subsidy. So that is a really serious threat. At least some neutral, or at least some industries could have a room for improvement and to avoid the negative effect, and the mitigate effect is such as some kind of nuclear energy or defense on other some energy, oils or natural gases. But still, it is very difficult to overcome when tariff is imposed. So then one way to overcome is diversify away the export route, not just on the United States. Clearly, U.S. market is the biggest and very attractive market, but still we should make effort to diversify away the export to other regions.
Right, and before we delve deeper into that, Professor Song, Mr. Trump has spoken of how tariffs will serve to lower U.S. trade deficits with its trading partners like South Korea, which last year, if I'm not mistaken, recorded a surplus of $55.7 billion US dollars with the U.S. Now, some pundits have cast doubt on the connection between tariffs and deficits. What are your thoughts?
Actually, this is the basic economic concept, and trade the deficit is not at all related with the tariff at all, because the balance of payment is always zero theoretically, economically, and because of the balance of trade plus net inflow of capital. For example, if United States import more goods, that is real goods. In return, they just deliver the US dollar, the paper currency. That is actually, in terms of a real good, it is just a paper. So then, for example, the Chinese companies who receive the US dollars, they cannot use US dollar in their consumption or investment in China at all. Therefore, they need to save or deposit in some bank, more Chinese renminbi bank, whatever bank. And those banks also, they have to purchase, or they must make a deposit. US dollar denominated currency should be deposited in the US bank again. Therefore, then, rather than just a deposit, they need to purchase the US Treasury bond, which promises the higher yield or rate of interest rate. So actually, that is to subsidize the US economy, because the US consumers, they could enjoy the real good with a cheaper price, but the exporting countries' consumers, all they receive is just a paper currency which cannot be used for the purchase in their domestic market. So this is very, it sounds very paradoxically, but actually this is the way how economy is working and trade is working. So actually there is no relationship at all. However, politically, that this is a symbolic gesture and that has been a very strong say and appealing to the US voters, then Trump, anyway, he should do, and then claim that there is a relationship because of the trade deficit and the tariff. And actually, we are going to wait and see and how it will play out, because clearly, from my perspective, the other renowned economists predict that this will backfire Trump policy about tariff. Therefore, they expect some kind of negotiation under the table.
Right, I see. Some kind of negotiations going forward then. Meanwhile, Andres, Bloomberg claims that South Korea may consider more U.S. food imports to appease the Trump administration. Do tell us more.
Well, that is a possible contingency that is being contemplated, but yet again a very sensitive one also, because we do know how this could affect the farming sector in Korea, and we do know how vocal the farmers in Korea can be. We might, some episodes in the past come to mind. For example, I remember when in 2011, Korea and the U.S. were negotiating the signing of the FTA, and a lawmaker actually detonated a tear gas on the floor of the National Assembly to try to block the approval of the FTA that, among many other thorny issues, included the imports of U.S. beef, I remember, which were, of course, supposed to hurt the local producers of Hanwoo, of Korean beef, here in Korea. So, again, a very sensitive issue. I think Seoul is now trying to look into other areas to increase its imports on, at least on a first step. That would be probably oil or gas, for example. And again, we have to think that, unfortunately, the Korean government is right now on an interim position to add to the complexity of the issue, because of the political turmoil that has been going on since President Yoon decided to declare martial law in December.
Right. Professor Song, as Andres has just mentioned, other foreign media claim that Korea may look into boosting energy imports from the U.S. to further appease Mr. Trump, especially keeping in mind his slogan on the day of inauguration. We spoke about, and I quote, "Drill, baby, drill." What are your thoughts regarding this import plan?
But actually, I doubt whether actually the purchase more U.S. products, such as Andres mentioned, that U.S. Meat or beef or the agricultural products, because in terms of the dollar amount, it is very small. Also, considering possibility is to purchase the energy products such as oil or natural gases from the United States. That is another option, but that does not necessarily placate Trump, because Trump's idea about the tariff imposing tariff is all around the world. Actually, not just China, not just the selected countries, including the most closest allies such as Mexico and Canada, even 25%. Then what about these products from Europe? So considering that, it doesn't help much. But however, what can we do is to mitigate just a direct threat or some problems caused for the multinational enterprise in the Hyundai, Kia, or Samsung, or SK Hynix, whatever, the biggest horses of Korean economy anyway. So in order to facilitate or smooth the potential difficulties. That is, as a gesture, I think that would be some positive effect on the negotiation. But considering our economy's growth prospect, because in last year's third quarter is 0.1% GDP growth, and fourth quarter is 0.2%. And recently, Bank of Korea has reduced the forecast of this 2025 GDP growth rate as low as 1.6%. So this tells us that we need to think very differently, not just hanging on the exporting or some Trump. Just the Trump tariff is given as constraint. Then, as I mentioned earlier, one way to overcome is look the other direction. So not just hanging on the U.S. is not anymore a viable strategy to reinvigorate the Korean economy anymore. So at least to make this smoothly, the relationship between the U.S. and no further claim by U.S. Trump administration, considering import such energy products, but actually that is sacrificing Korean consumers because that oil price will be very high, considering the cut rate of Russian oil is almost nothing in comparison to other imported oils. So that means actually we, at the sacrifice of Korean consumers, purchase high price, pay for their oil and the energy price, and then to make the big companies to have a smooth trade relationship with the U.S. So we need to think about it again.
Right, I see.
Yeah.
Andres, as Professor Song mentioned, Trump tariffs are targeting most of its global partners, all of its trading partners. That being said, do you suppose that trade talks between the EU and Mexico were revived because of the threat of Trump tariffs?
Well, I do think that indeed. I mean, both Mexico and the EU, just like many other trading partners of the U.S., have been bracing for the impact of his policy decisions regarding trade. And last Friday, negotiations right ahead of Trump's inaugurations, negotiations between Mexico and Brussels were concluded to upgrade the FTA between the two sides. This new FTA is going to include now, for example, equal access for companies of both sides to public tenders, for example, but most importantly, agricultural products for the first time. Now, again, the exchange of goods and services between the EU and Mexico, I believe, is in the ballpark of around $100 billion a year, something like that, which is basically less than 10 times. I mean, it's less than a tenth of the exchange between the U.S. and the EU, which I believe is around 1.3 or 1.2 trillion USD a year. Again, I think that there is potential for growth there, and that this FTA intends to actually increase and improve those numbers. But you know, I think the important thing here is, as Professor Song was pointing out, is how both the EU, Mexico, and other countries are just trying to look for alternative trading networks, supply chains, etc. Now that Donald Trump has become the president, for example, the EU actually just signed its first FTA very, very recently, ahead of Trump's inauguration, with Mercosur, which is the economic and trade bloc of Latin American countries formed by Argentina, Paraguay, Uruguay, Brazil, and Bolivia. So as you pointed out, everybody's trying to find alternatives to the current situation.
Right, and that being said then, Professor Song, even before Mr. Trump returned to the White House, you've frequently highlighted on Arirang News the importance for Korea to diversify its export markets. Keeping that in mind, do you suppose Korea is doing enough to diversify its own export markets?
Oh, absolutely no, never. At least not on the. They did nothing under the Yoon's regime. And as Andres pointed out, there is some. This is a very dilemma situation for some countries because they would like to make some negotiation and get a favorable condition. But however, when they cooperate with each other and looking for other alternative system, that is another issue. So considering that in mind, I think the Trump's policy is a high tariff, and then still he wants to retain the U.S. dollar's hegemony over the whole trade in the industry or world global trade. And also he would like to reduce the trade deficit. That is trilemma which cannot be achieved. Cannot be achieved. Simultaneously, it cannot be achieved. Impossible. That is impossible trilemma. So, because even as long as to retain the U.S. dollar's dominancy, the appreciation of the U.S. dollar cannot be avoided. That implies that China may face the massive tariff. As Andres remarked, that 60%. But another way is some kind of the massive appreciation of renminbi, for example. That could make the U.S. exports be cheap enough for the Chinese consumers to purchase the U.S. product. That could help mitigate the U.S. deficit. But that is natural and that is economic way. But however, China will not accept it because China is not anymore, it cannot be a Japan. Under the 1985 Plaza Accord, Japan has been derailed for permanently out of the industrial strength, and they lose the industrial prowess and the financial ascendancy in the world economy. So that means China will not accept such a Plaza Accord similar type of appreciation of the Chinese renminbi against the US dollar. That implies that China may rely on the BRICS and plus some alternative system, not depending upon the US dollar. That is another, the way how this round of the conflict play out in the future.
I see. A very difficult issue then. All right, Professor Song, as always, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Right, and Andres, as always, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you so much for having us here.
Right, well, that ends this edition of Press Perspective. We return same time tomorrow, that is Thursday, with a look at the latest political events. Do join us then.